Welcome to Painting with Yuk-Sem. Today we're going to be doing a fall painting with some of the warm colors and really try and incorporate some of those abstract techniques in order to try something new. So we're going to go into a lot of the bold strokes instead of being realistic. So let's get started. So I'm using acrylic paint and just adding a bit of water in order to get that nice coverage with the paint. So I'm going to start with the cadmium yellow, and today's technique is going to be a little bit different from usual because instead of starting with the normal blue background, I'm going to show you how you can start with your color and get a good blend and then add the background after. So I'm starting with the cadmium yellow because for the fall trees, we're going to go and try and get that color grade from yellow going into the orange. And I didn't wash my brush, and I'm just painting over in order to get that nice blend of colors. And I'm going to come back in and get some of that nice bright orange down on this side. Where I see too many brush strokes, I'm just going to blend, and it's going to blend right up into that yellow. So I'm using my big brush so I can really get the coverage on that background. If you see that there's not enough that you're putting on your paint and it's not covering and you're seeing your canvas through, chances are you just need to add a bit of either some medium, or I just use water to make it spread a little bit better. And that should help you get that coverage without too many of those white strokes. So I am now going with my brush, has a little bit of the yellow still and some orange, and I'm going to go pick up that cadmium red. When you're painting, remember that sometimes you have to get the paint to work for you instead of working hard to get the paint to do it what you want it to do. Sometimes it'll just, you have to use what it does on its own. So the fact that I have the two different colors, 2 or 3 colors on my brush, is to my advantage when I want it to blend, because then it's still putting on some of that orange even though I'm using the red. And that's where you're getting these nicer tones, and it's not just orange and then red. You're getting that blend in the middle there. So I'm going to come in down here and add in some of that nice bright red down here. I'm going to add just a touch of black to the red, just to give it a bit of a darker look down at the bottom, which will probably get covered up later on, but just in case some of it shows up, we'll have it be a bit of a darker shadow area. So really quickly, without even washing my brush, you can see that we've covered the whole canvas from the yellow into the orange, and then blended some of that orange into the red, so that you're getting all of those colors mashed together, and there's nothing too defined or those great big lines between them. So now I'm going to wash off that brush and make sure that I get that color off. The one thing about when you're washing your brush is if you leave it full of paint and put it down, the acrylic paint will actually be between, but it'll harden, and then it's really hard to get off. You have to get some of the either the painter's soap, or it'll take quite a bit of work to get off. So if you can rinse your brush really well between colors, your brushes will last much, much longer. So I'm going into a smaller brush. It's about 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch. And what I'm going to do is wherever I have yellow, I'm going to bring in some of the colors that are beside it. So in the yellow, I'm going to, with the smaller brush, I'm going to come in and add some of the orange. But here, I'm going to try and keep it in blocks. So instead of, and you can use this technique even with the realistic shapes for the leaves if you want, the rounder ones. But for this one, I want to keep that, we're going to go with a blockier feel. So I'm going to try and use more of the squares and rectangles in order to give that abstract feel for the painting. So wherever I see that mix, and I'm thinking that I want to have either a tree, so we're going to have a clump of trees here and another one here, is that I'm just going to add some of that orange to really have that color pop. So in the orange, what I want to add are the colors beside it. So I'm going to take some of the yellow, and then I'm going to do some in the red. So in order to do that, make sure that your brush is washed. It's nice and clean. And then I'm going to come in with that yellow, and right in the orange, I'm going to start adding it in. Because yellow doesn't necessarily have the greatest coverage, and you can see through it a lot, I'll add just a bit of white to it, so you'll keep that yellow color. It'll be a bit lighter. You won't be able to tell as much on here, but when you do paint, that white's going to come in and help you cover that darker color. So I'm coming in and I'm just adding some of those blocks in between, and then I'm going to wash off that brush and then come in with the red here. So in the orange, I'm going through with the red so that that color really pops. Trying to keep, I'm not going to go and put the red in the yellow because that's too big of a range. So here, when it starts to blend with the orange and the red, you'll see that the red still does show up. But if I came down here, then it barely shows. So you want to have some contrast, and the contrast is where you see a difference. So even though I'm making blocks, sometimes you can add pieces together, and that'll give you some of those abstract shapes that are nice to see. So down in the red, I'm going to start bringing some of that orange, and again the same thing. If you see that it's not going through, what you can do is add a little bit of that white, because the titanium will give you that coverage. So I'm adding the white, adding it to that orange, and then when you come in, that white will help you get some coverage of that dark red that wants to overpower. And if you find that it's too white, wait for it to dry, and when it is dry, the white part, you can come over with that cadmium orange or those bright colors and just go over that spot, and it should cover it fairly well. So because I have the light yellow on this end, what's going to happen is that your eye is automatically going to transfer it and make it go from the light to the dark. So this is where the sun is. So wherever the sun is, that's where I want to be able to show that on the outsides, I want a little bit of that light. So I'll come and get wherever I think that the sun is going to hit this foliage down here. I want to make sure that I keep some clumps of where that light is hitting. And I'm going to do the same thing with that yellow with a little bit of the white mixed in. And in this area here where I think that light's going to hit, I'm going to make sure that I'm putting in a few highlights. And I'm just using the brush stroke, and because the brush is square, this is going to be really easy way to put in some of those blocks and shapes. Sometimes I like to go outside my comfort zone and try new techniques, especially when it comes to abstract. I'm more of a realist painter, so you know, every once in a while playing with color, playing with shapes is something that helps me expand my abilities and really go and try something new. So I'm going to do the same thing. Now I've done these ones. I'm going to go to a smaller brush and do one more coverage of just a few of those little squares, trying to make sure that I'm keeping the color blend so that the orange is still creeping into the yellow, but not overpowering it. And that if I go into the red, and I'm adding some of the smaller leaves now, that I don't encroach too much into the yellow, that I keep it in the orange. And then down here, by adding the orange into the red, just getting those smaller leaf patterns or those ideas, impressions of leaves. So now that I have the majority of the leaves done, in the back, what's what I want to be the trees, now I'm going to add in a couple of the trunks. So I'm going to use a bigger brush. It's still square because that'll help me get that nice line. I'm going to add water to the black, get a fair amount of it on the brush. So remember, excuse me, when use your brush, and if you used it where it was horizontal, you're going to get a thick line. If you turn it and use it vertically, then you have lots of paint and you can get that nice vertical thin line. So here, I'm going to turn my brush, make sure that it's vertical, and come right down. And as I get down to the bottom, I'm just pressing a little bit more, which makes the brushes spread out and will give you that thicker line. So it's the same thing here, starting at the top, slowly pressing more to give me that thick line. One more time from the top. I'm not pressing, and then I start applying more pressure, and that'll give me that thick line. I'm going to come over on this side, same thing. And I'm not worried if it picks up a bit of the color that's still wet. It'll all blend itself in. So there I had a bit too much paint. So if ever you do something and it's not exactly what you want, so let's say here I messed up the side, nobody will know because all I have to do is come back in, and now I'm just making it a bit thicker, and nobody will know that ever happened. So I think one of the things that painters, the difference between being a hobby painter and being a professional painter, is that you know how to fix those mistakes to turn them into a part of your actual painting instead of being worried about them and having them stay as a mistake. So the more you practice, the more you find out how to turn those into, you know, happy parts of your painting instead. Down here, I'm just going to add maybe a few shorter ones. And they don't have to go all the way to the bottom, because sometimes we'll just see that there's some bushes at the bottom that come in and cover those trunks, so we're not seeing it all. Now, in this area, what I'm going to do is, using the black, I'm going to start covering it in the same kind of squares and rectangles in order to give the impression of there being the bushes and foliage here. And sometimes if it's, I'm not too worried about the coverage over the color. Over the white, I want it to be fairly covered. So here's one of the tricks that I show in some of my classes, is that if you're trying to paint at the bottom of your canvas and your easel is in the way and it's not working, you take your canvas. If you flip it upside down, you can easily paint the bottom, get all that covered. Once you have that nice coverage on it, at whatever point you're ready to flip it back, then you just take it and flip it back. And there you go, you've got a nice coverage, and that's another secret that you can use. Don't always try and squeeze into your easel. Remember that the canvas is movable. Just like your brushes can be turned, so can your canvas. And that might help you at some point get a nicer technique. So I'm just coming in with that black and I'm adding those shapes. Now that I have the big brush done, I'll get off most of that paint. I'm going to come in with a bit of a smaller brush, and then, because these are the big shapes, I'm going to come in and just over it start adding in some of the smaller ones to give the impression I'm still using the shape of the brush, which is that square, and just adding to the bushes and grass that are at the bottom. And because they're dark, what ends up happening is that they're at the forefront. So they're in the front of our subject, which is the colored forest back there. There. So I do want some leaves in these trees, and the trees, because we've done them in silhouette and black, I'm going to use the same brush. I'm going to go get some more black, and I'm just going to start adding a few areas where I have some clumps of leaves up at the top. And those look now like they're at the front of those colored leaves that are back there. And that's how you can use color to really play with the perspective, what's in front and what's behind. And I'm just adding, I'm not worried about the shape because I'm just using the brush and going sideways, up, down, making sure that I'm just watching that I'm getting good coverage in the places that I want. Same thing over here now on this side. We'll add a few on this side. especially in the areas where I didn't know, but I left some areas where I didn't put any color. So might as well fill some of that in with some of these. Play with your shapes. Be adventurous and let it kind of find its own life. Say, oh, I think that there's an open spot, so let's just go up there and put one in. And don't be afraid to try something new. Worst comes to worst, you wait for it to dry, put a bit of white, put a bit of red or yellow or orange back on it, and it's all good. Nobody knows. If there's some color that you didn't like, now's a good time to grab that black and come in here and cover it up. So we're almost done with this black. Remembering that we just have to add some water. If ever our coverage, our paint is too thick and it's not covering the way we want, try adding a bit of water and that might fix your problem. Here I have a bit of branches that are floating with nothing on them, so I'm going to come in and here and add just now some color. Just to add a little bit there. All right. Now I'm going to show you how to do the background last. In this type of painting, what's fun is that if you take your brush and you have your colors up there and you know where you want, we can now just use the color in order to make that perspective. So I'm going and I'm getting that light blue. And what I'm going to do is beside where that black is, I'm coming in with the light blue and adding in the same types of squares as I did with the red, the orange, and the yellow. Sometimes I'm going to go right up, not always, but right up to where the tree trunk is. But what's going to end up happening is slowly, so let's say I'm going to cover up that whole color corner to really give the impression of sky. But as you add your blocks of blue, what you end up doing is adding little areas where the sky is peeking through the trees. And instead of doing it in the beginning and trying to cover it up with the color, we end up doing it afterwards. So I'm going to keep on adding those squares of blue. Throughout the painting. First with a bigger brush, and then I'm going to come in a minute and do the same thing with that smaller brush. Wash that off, grab the smaller brush, come in and start adding in those smaller shapes again around where I have those bigger brush strokes. And what ends up happening is that your eye will eventually, when you look at it, it'll piece together the yellow and the orange and the red as being the foliage that's in the background, but that the blue is actually peeking through that wall. So the last little piece that I want to do to really bring it together is that now I'm going to use that brush and I'm going to come in with some of the green so that wherever the blue and some of the colors meet, if I add just a few touches of green to break it up, that will help your mind and to picture it as a little bit more of a tree, and that the sky is peeking through. So every once in a while here, where I want the sky and the black with the as a tree to be coming through, I'm just going to add a touch of that green to be able to help with that, bring that abstract a little bit closer to reality. And I'm going to bring that all the way down wherever there's that black will help. So, and there's no right or wrong way to play with your colors or how you're going to be putting them. As you go, you might find that you really like one type of color blend or not. You'll discover what works and what doesn't, but this is a fun way that you can try and discover what patterns you like and what helps your painting come to life. And sometimes doing abstract is fun, and it's a way to really start broadening your artistic skills rather than just trying to reproduce a more photo reference type painting. So I'm just going to add a couple of more color blocks. And if you notice, I'm not adding too much green at the bottom. And that's really because I want it to represent the lighted areas. So I don't want it to be in the shadow. So the light green is really highlighting those areas of the tree that I want to have that impression of having those leaves. So just like that, we've put together a bit of an abstract painting for fall. Feel free to try it out, to change it up. I think one of the last things I'm going to do is just come in and highlight maybe a couple of these branches and the tree trunks here as being a little bit lighter because of that light coming in. Add a few white highlights to show that the sun's coming through. And we'll call that one done for today. All right. I hope you've enjoyed painting with me today and that you've learned something, that you'll take a chance, risk, try new things, and don't be afraid to try abstract. So until the next time, have fun painting, and we'll see you again soon.